From Boca Raton, Florida, this is Behind the Bima. On this episode, Rabbi Goldberg and co-host Rabbi Philip Moskowitz and Rabbi Josh Broide are joined by Congressman Ritchie Torres and by Shabbos Kestenbaum, a Jewish student activist. Congressman Torres gives an inside view into his support of Israel and what makes him feel isolated. Shabbos shares his experience on the ground at Harvard and his lawsuit against the university, discusses how he is moved by the Kotzker Rebbe, and inspires with his fierce Jewish pride and leadership. Plus, reflecting on the world that has changed post-October 7th, bringing humility and honesty to us all. All this and more, Behind the Bima.
Welcome to Behind the Bima. Honored as always to be joined by my dear friends and colleagues, Rabbi Philip Moskowitz and Rabbi Josh Broide. This is a powerful, powerful episode. It's really a sad episode as we are talking about unimaginable topics we never dreamt of. Congressman Ritchie Torres back on Behind the Bima for a second time. He's been to our community, a champion of the U.S.-Israel relationship and standing up steadfast friend of the Jewish community against anti-Semitism. But hearing what he describes and what he shares about the price he's paid to stand with the Jewish people within his own family, let alone within politics, breaks your heart. And Shabbos Kestenbaum, talking about the stories he's going to say, death threats to his life. I don't know, gentlemen, to me, this might be our saddest episode we've ever had. Not the people, they're heroes, and they're eloquent, and they're incredible. But this topic and the reality of the stories that they're telling and what we're dealing with, I think this is the saddest episode.
It definitely was eye-opening. That's probably more of the word that I would use, but eye-opening in a very sad way. What Shabbos Kestenbaum described as going on Harvard, you can't appreciate, even through the news, even through watching and reading, you can't fully appreciate what these college students are going through. And I do think there's a little bit of a disconnect between the experience that they have and the relative safety and security that you and I feel here in Boca. They are putting themselves out on the line every second of every day to defend a cause that you and I believe in and is near and dear to us. And I admire them. And there's a part of me that wishes I could be doing more and looking in the mirror and saying, maybe I should be doing more. And they're risking everything for this. And it's really heroic and amazing.
Yeah, and the question is what's going to be with the next group of graduates that graduate high schools across North America? Are they going to be following and going back to these universities, or are they saying, no, it's over, we're not going?
Do you see the images of the tents and of the campus takeovers and what's going on? And there's a lot of students pushing back, and you see some, there's a prominent Jewish professor at Columbia who's been pushing back. Do you wonder, I say this not as a criticism, so if my friends are listening and watching, I love you and I'm not criticizing in the least. I'm asking and I'm curious because I'm just trying to imagine if this were happening local to us. Do you wonder, why haven't we seen any familiar faces? Like, should local rabbis and local communities be like, today we're going to Columbia, we're going to Yale, we're going to Princeton, we're going to Penn, we're going to MIT, we're going up to Harvard, like, or maybe you're adding fuel to the fire. Don't give it more attention. Don't risk your lives because these things are really dangerous. They're not a joke. Like, do we wonder? Meaning, I guess what I'm asking is, if this were happening more locally, Palm Beach or down in Miami, would we be like having a flyer and a rally and be like a bus and everyone drive down and here we are, we're getting in their faces and we're grabbing Alan Berger and David Berger and our people that we hide behind, but right there next to, and would we be there? Should we be doing that?
Well, that's what I kind of meant with the disconnect. I mean, that was the premise of my comment, is that you do wonder. I would hope that there are conversations, and my guess is that they've been told that it will add fuel to the fire, and it's unhelpful to be able to do that. But it definitely, if locally, I know the two of you would be revving up. You'd have the car packed with your flags in the back, and you'd be ready to go.
I'm thinking about flying there. Like, it's hard to feel like a passive spectator, to be standing by and not doing more. But I want to share with both of you, and I want your reaction. My other takeaway from this episode and these conversations, really, really extraordinary people and extraordinary conversations, is that these are two people that I wouldn't say before October 7th, because we knew Congressman Torres then and already admired his love of Israel. But if Congressman Torres didn't have on his resume and towards the top of it being a staunch pro-Israel advocate, these are two people who are self-described liberal progressive Democrats,
right?
Marching with and standing for things that either currently or previously we would disagree strongly about. We might, if the camera's off, have things to say. We would never call anyone a name, but we certainly we'd have a huge distance between us. And here we are, and not only not focused on those differences and those disagreements and those labels, here we are saying, these are heroes. You're amazing. We wish we could be more like you. We're so grateful to you. And then we've discussed this in the past, but there's others in that category, right? I am among those, Hashem Nebagadnu, I'm embarrassed to admit, who looked at a John Fetterman and said, this Nebuch stroke victim, like, what is he doing in Senate? Look how he dresses. Look how he carries himself. Look what is he doing? And meanwhile, the guy's my hero. The guy's my hero with his little Israeli flag and waving it, and absolutely undeterred to stand with Israel. So my point about this, and really feeling it after both of these conversations, is this a moment for all of us to stop and say, let's be less definitive and conclusive and confident in our positions about people and things. Like, the world's complicated. The person who you thought today you have nothing to do with and is on the opposite side of what you believe in, and you even negatively or want to work against, could rise to be the hero of your cause. Like, just be a little more nuanced, be a little softer, be a little more subtle, wait and see, find commonality, like in everything. It's a major moment, I think, in all directions. There are people we thought were in our camp and they're nowhere to be found, that we loved them and we touted them and we worshiped them, and they're absentee. There are people we thought were on the opposite side with nothing to do with, and they're heroes.
Right.
It's like, maybe it's a moment, it's a huge moment of humility, I think, and I don't know that the humility is there.
I'll tell you who's been doing this brilliantly for years, and it's why we love them so much, is AIPAC. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about with Congressman Torres about how he got involved in pro-Israel advocacy and activism. But, for years, AIPAC was investing heavily in communities that you and I, at least on paper, wouldn't necessarily say we have anything in common with. Students on college campus, which we disagree with vehemently on a lot of policies. We'd go to policy conference and they'd always put up people who view the world very differently than us. But they, for years, have recognized that if you invest in those relationships early on, if you can get someone at a level where they're just developing their perspectives on the world and policies, and you can get them at a student council level or whatever, and you can bring them in and educate them about Israel, forget everything else, who they're going to march with and what they're going to do. If they're going to grow up to be a pro-Israel advocacy, that is a win for the pro-Israel community. And they've been doing that for years, and they've been investing heavily into it for years.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say that it just comes back to relationships. Here you have a relationship maybe with an agenda. The agenda might be Israel. But in general, there are many people live in our community that are definitely on the other side of something. They're not bad people. They're just different. They have a different opinion. Yeah. But they could be your brother and they could be your sister. If you just are open to that relationship.
Right. It's more than that, what Rabbi Goldberg's saying. It's not just that they're different, but they're also our brother. Here he's saying they're different.
I know. Here you have some.
But on the one issue that you and I care about more than anything else, they are hitting a grand slam home run. And for that, we may have overlooked that. We may have overlooked a John Fetterman. We may have overlooked someone because of,
Well, we did
before. But on policy one, if they're in that grand slam.
Nobody overlooked them, by the way. And AIPAC will tell you that they knew John Fetterman was great on Israel. Just nobody was noticing that because of his hoodies and his shorts and his and the stroke recovery. Sort of nobody knew that. But if you took the time, I guess that's my point, is that we shouldn't see some part of someone as the sum total of who they are. Oh, you're a liberal progressive. Oh, you're a this. Oh, you march with that. Oh, you stand for this. Oh, you care about that. You and I now are different.
Therefore, you're that. Like, that's what.
Right. Therefore, you're now the other. Yeah. But rather, okay, but let's talk more about it. Oh, you love Kotzker and Hasidus in Poland? Wow, we have so much of that in common. Meaning, and I'm going to say, I don't want to get in trouble for saying this. And Shabbos, I apologize to you if this comes out the wrong way. But these conversations left me feeling humbled by how much they're doing and how inadequate I feel. But also, and even more, humbled by, but if October 5th, someone would have said, I got this great guy, Shabbos Kestenbaum, I'm having him behind the Bima, I would have been like, with the kid who marched with Black Lives Matter and LGBT, and the kid who taught here and works with that. They would say, well, he's also into Hasidus. I was okay, but no, that's not a comment. And I'm humbled by, I would have been overlooking and dismissing. I would have not been connecting with someone from whom I could learn so much. And it doesn't mean we wouldn't still disagree or have important disagreements and conversations. I just think post-October 7th, this is an enormous opportunity. Right. It's humility about the fact that we've always talked about how ready Israel is and the government, the IDF can stop anyone. And there's enormous humility, not for us to have. There's enormous introspection, self-reflection, humility on that end. But there's also, I think, just a general humility in how we label people and what we assume about people in every direction. There are major moments, and that's my feeling of this, being humbled and humility. And I hope for myself, I'm not talking about anyone else, to be able to use that humility into approaching things differently with people going forward and not seeing them only by that particular label about what we disagree, but to be challenged. It's really this week's parsha. You have to l'recha kamocha. The kamocha, like, okay, let's find what we have in common. Let's find what we care about together. Let's find where I can learn from you and admire. And that other piece doesn't have to become the whole part of who you are.
First of all, I agree 100%. The other takeaway I had from the conversation is that these are people that literally are living every second of every day in defense of Israel, and their lives are so dramatically different from October 7th. We've spoken about a lot. The disconnect between diaspora Jewry and Jewry in Israel. And, we struggle with going on with regular life here in America, even though despite what's going on in Israel, we've spoken about on Behind the Bima, going to Simchas in the aftermath of October 7th, of, doing events in the aftermath of October 7th. These are people that have fundamentally changed their lives. As you said, they've earned enemies, death threats, but they wake up every morning with a calling. And the calling is that post October 7th, Israel needs us. They need people who are outspoken, and they need people that are going to be in defense of them. And they've changed everything. And they are living with like an Israel-centered lens on every moment of every waking day. And I think for us, again, I think we've done a okay job of doing that. But it's just a reminder of us that, if we're here in the diaspora, if we're here outside of Israel, and we're not fighting on the front lines, we can't afford to get tired, and we can't afford to be sheepish, and we can't afford to be embarrassed to state our opinions. We also have to live every second of every day of our lives, if we're going to be in the diaspora, either feeling the pain and defending our brothers and sisters in Israel.
Absolutely.
I think the big question is, how do you do that? In other words, so you've taken many trips, we've given checks, and we've raised money, and now you have these wars on college campuses. What do we do? What else? How do you connect? We're not going to Israel next week. We're not going to college campuses next week. Thank God Florida's safer than most, and we want to do something. You want it right now. What can we do for a college campus? It's scary to think that
there's that line that I tried to change the world. I realized I couldn't. I tried and then I realized I had to change myself. So I do think part of it is every person, every family looking internally and saying, are we doing enough to constantly feel the pain and also to, do our part to defend our brothers and sisters in Israel? We have, Monday is going to be Yom HaZikaron. It's going to be a very challenging day for we all have friends and family in Israel. And I think any year Yom HaZikaron is difficult for Israel. This year, obviously, it's going to take on a whole new level. We thought about maybe getting to Israel next week. We're not going to be able to. So we'll be here in Florida. But what are we doing for Yom HaZikaron? What are you doing as a family to mark that day in a way that says, there are 600 soldiers that have lost their lives since the last Yom HaZikaron in defense of Israel. Over the last, number of years, 25,000 soldiers that we're going to be commemorating on Yom HaZikaron. What are we going to do to show that it's not just a normal day, but that this is a day that we mark those who have given their lives in defense of not just the state of Israel, but the people of Israel around the world?
Well, this episode hopefully will challenge all of us to think about that and come up with our own answers. And we are honored, we're grateful, and we're humbled to be able to bring you these conversations. It's truly an honor to be back together on Behind the Bima with you, Congressman Ritchie Torres. Thank you for joining us once again, and really much more than for being on Behind the Bima, from the bottom of our hearts, for being a champion of standing up for the U.S.-Israel relationship, for fighting anti-Semitism, for defending the Jewish people, and for so much more, for caring so much about America. From the bottom of our hearts, we absolutely can't say thank you enough. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for joining us here on Behind the Bima again.
It's an honor to be here.
So, Congressman, last time we had you, obviously, was long before October 7th. Even then, Israel needed friendship and champions, and you were and are just that. We thanked you then, but the world has so radically changed since October 7th, not only for Israel, that garnered sympathy for a very short window, but then is still struggling for the world to have tell the accurate story and to stand with Israel. But obviously, the explosion of anti-Semitism on college campuses. We recently spoke with Shabbos Kestenbaum, one of your constituents, who said that you've been an amazing friend to him and to his peers at Harvard and elsewhere to help guide and support and stand up for the Jewish community. The world has so radically changed. And for you, I'm sure there must have been pressure as a self-described progressive and a proud liberal Democrat, maybe from within your own party or movement, or just in general politically, always, if you don't have a seat at the table, if you're not in office, you can't make a difference on this or other things. So I don't know if it's been even more complicated since October 7th to navigate. Where do you want to fall out, and how do you want to stand on the U.S.-Israel relationship, and how vocal do you want to be on anti-Semitism on campus? But from our perspective, you haven't wavered at all. Could you walk us through whether even after October 7th, did the pressure ratchet up? Has the pressure been harder on you? How have you maintained that courage of your conviction to stay true and to continue? Could you tell us a little bit about what that's been like?
Well, there's no issue on which I face more hate, harassment, and even death threats than on the issue of Israel. It's put enormous strain not only on political but also personal relationships. I'm no longer on speaking terms with a close family member of mine because her position on the issue is quite different from mine, and she's jumped on the Free Palestine bandwagon on social media. Even my mother's been the target of harassment. There were activists who said to my mother, "You're a genocide mother and you should have aborted your son." And so the viciousness of the attacks on me and my family are hard to overstate. But if you allow yourself to be bullied, you're going to continue to be bullied. That's one of the lessons that I learned from the Bronx. And for me, the greatest threat to the U.S.-Israel relationship, the greatest threat to our liberal democracy, does not come from the far right or from the far left. It comes from the cowardice of a center that lives in fear of the extremes. Like Franklin Roosevelt was exactly right when he said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And I, for one, refuse to live in fear. I feel the Achilles heel of most elected officials is a pathological need to be loved by everyone. And thankfully, I'm so socially ill-adjusted that I have no need to be loved by anyone. And I'm willing to stand for what I believe in, even if it means standing alone, and even if it means facing excommunication from the progressive movement.
We can't thank you enough, and that must be so painful to be so devoted. Is it costing you? First of all, we said one question each, but with a follow-up. Is it costing you, or do you fear it costs you politically? Because again, you must always be evaluating that I can't make a difference if I'm not here, but I don't want to be here in a way that I'm selling myself. So how do you navigate that?
My pro-Israel advocacy has made me public enemy number one for the far left in New York City and elsewhere in the United States. So I fully expect to face an aggressive primary challenge in the next election cycle. I have a diverse district. I represent the largest Jewish community in the Bronx, Riverdale, but I also represent the largest Muslim population in the Bronx, Little Yemen. And it would be fair to say that my position on Israel, my pro-Israel advocacy, is highly controversial in Little Yemen. And so there has been some hemorrhaging of support because of the stance that I've taken. But you have to fight for what you believe in.
And you will be invited back to Boca, and we are here to stand with you and support you in every way.
I might be more popular in Boca Raton than I am in.
Well, you're definitely popular by us, and we want to thank you again. You obviously you've been to Israel many times, even before October 7th. You've been there very publicly since October 7th. You've been really boots on the ground. You've seen it, and you've spoken to people, and you've really done an amazing job of listening. And I think for Israelis and American Jews, even just showing up and listening is a huge statement. And again, I want to thank you. What do you think some people don't get? Many people who are protesting, many people who are opposing certain policies, they've never been to Israel. They've never gone down south. They've never seen the places where these atrocities took place. What would you want to communicate to them that they're not seeing, that you, by being there, by speaking to real people, understand? What would you want your critics to understand?
Know before judging. A wise person once said you do have the option of having no opinion. But if you must form an opinion, you should actually go to Israel and experience both the majesty and the complexity of the country firsthand, and speak to a variety of people. Speak to both Israelis and Palestinians. Speak to both Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs. See the facts on the ground with your own eyes. Go to a place like State Road. For me, there is no substitute for firsthand experience, which is the best form of education, especially about an area as complicated as Israel. I've been traveling to Israel for about 10 years. When I went for the first time back in 2014, it was one of the most formative and transformative experiences of my life. Going to Yad Vashem, going to the Masada, and especially going to State Road. I remember speaking to the local mayor of State Road, who said that the majority of his children struggle with post-traumatic stress because families like his live under the threat of relentless rocket fire. And so I thought to myself, imagine the trauma of a 5-year-old Israeli child seeking refuge in a shelter, a bomb shelter, while sirens are going off and rockets are being fired and adults are panicking in a state of pandemonium. You know, I represent the Bronx, which is one of the poorest areas in the country. I have constituents who live in fear of bullets, gun violence, but no one in the United States lives in fear of rockets. You know, none of us as Americans worry that Canada and Mexico are going to fire rockets into American homes and communities. And so Israel faces a level of insecurity and volatility that has no equivalent in the American experience. And so in order to fully understand the complex security situation confronting the Jewish state, you have to go to Israel. You have to see the facts on the ground with your own eyes. And I guarantee you, if you have an open heart and an open mind, you will come to realize that the reality is far more complicated than the caricature that percolates on social media platforms and college campuses.
Thank you. And my follow-up, just so in 2014, that was an AIPAC sponsored trip. That was, you went with what brought you to Israel for the first time?
So it was the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. Yeah.
Amazing.
And I was a New York City council member at the time. And I actually had never traveled abroad before. So Israel was the first country to which I traveled abroad.
Congressman, I'm just wondering, you know, everyone wants to do something and everyone's trying to advocate for a position that we believe in. Has everyone dug their heels in so deep right now that if we want to try and contact congressmen, congresswomen, members of Congress that have a different opinion, do those phone calls matter right now? And to the people that are supportive, is it a waste of time to keep calling and saying no, to you, oh, you gotta do it, but you're doing it already? Or is it, you know what, we're calling you because we got to say thank you, and you need a little bit of encouragement when you hear all the death threats and everything else? What should we be doing in our communities?
Look, members of Congress are human. You know, we have morale and we need motivation. You know, we're flooded with hateful calls because of our support for Israel. And so I feel like those of us in the pro-Israel community have to be as visibly and vocally pro-Israel as the other side is anti-Israel. We have to match the intensity of the other side, because in politics, intensity is often destiny. And so I would encourage people to engage with their members of Congress, lobby their members of Congress, attempt to persuade them if they're wavering or if they're on the wrong side of the issue, and then provide moral support to your allies. You know, we're not for the moral support that I've gotten from the Jewish community. This moment would be an emotional struggle for me because I paid a heavy political and personal price. And what has sustained me has been the outpouring of gratitude and support from the Jewish community.
Thank you.
That's important to know, and we have to follow up. Is there legislation in the works? You know, we watch these scenes unfold in college campuses. We hear the stories like your constituent whom we just interviewed, Shabbos Kestenbaum, and it's not believable to be threatened with a machete by a actual faculty member at Harvard, and Harvard to take no action is not even believable. It's literally not believable. Is there further legislation? Is there emergency or rapid legislation? Can it get support on both sides of the aisle that figures out a way so that we can clean up and clear these college campuses, so that we can hold the colleges accountable who are getting federal funding? Or what can be done? What are you and your colleagues doing, and how can we support you with that?
Well, there's no magic bullet, but there are a few actions that we can take. First, we need to seriously examine the influence of foreign gifts on higher education, particularly from Qatar. I think we should seriously consider legislation that would ban foreign gifts from adversarial countries or from countries that finance terrorist organizations like Hamas, countries like Qatar. And so I worry that Qatari influence has led to a rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on America college campuses. I'll give you one concrete example in K-12 education. There was in a public school in Brooklyn, the Qatari Foundation funded an Arab heritage program. Obviously, nothing wrong with an Arab heritage program, but it had an image of the Middle East where Israel was wiped off the map. Right? That was the kind of image that was shown to students in the public school system, right? So that has to be prevented. And it's happening not only in K-12 education, but even more so in higher education. Second, there needs to be more rigorous enforcement of Title VI. As you know, any college or university that creates a hostile environment for Jews on college campus is acting in violation of Title VI and should be held accountable. We should leverage the power that we have over federal dollars to combat anti-Semitism in the ranks of higher education. Now, I have no confidence that the Federal Department of Education is going to effectively enforce Title VI from the ivory tower of Washington, D.C., given how chronically under-resourced it has been. And so I introduced legislation with Mike Lawler that would empower the federal DOE to impose a monitor on colleges like Columbia University so that you have a monitor who's on the ground, who sees the facts on the ground with his own eyes, and who can enforce Title VI. Without enforcement, the law is going to atrophy from neglect.
Amazing. I hope that passes and passes quickly. How are things in your district in terms of anti-Semitism? Have you heard reports that Jews are uncomfortable? Have there been a rise in anti-Semitic incidents in your district?
I think the number one issue that's weighing heavily on my Jewish constituents is anti-Semitism. I think people are appalled by the outbreak of anti-Semitism on college campuses, on social media platforms in New York City, which has the largest Jewish population outside the state of Israel. It is alarming, and so that's why I fight my heart out against anti-Semitism, to send a powerful message that I stand with both the Jewish people and the Jewish state, especially in a post-October 7 world when that solidarity is needed now more than ever before.
We can't thank you enough for all that you do. We're grateful for your time, and we don't want to take advantage of it. And we look forward to having you back for a third time on Behind the Bima, this time hopefully to celebrate how wonderful the news is and how good things are and the kind of productive, beautiful things that are happening and the unity that we're all celebrating and peace in Israel and America and everywhere. So, Congressman, may God bless you with strength and health and clarity and harmony within your own family and beyond. It breaks our heart to hear that this has penetrated into your own family in ways that are so heartbreaking. You're paying a heavy price to which we owe you a debt that there are not words to express how appreciative we are. So God bless you. Thank you for all that you do. And we look forward to continuing to be in touch soon.
God bless you as well. Take care.
Thank you. Welcome back to Behind the Bima. We're so honored and privileged to have the opportunity. It's not every day that you get to experience Shabbos in the middle of the week. A big welcome to Shabbos Kestenbaum. Shabbos, thank you for being with us. We are incredibly grateful to you for being really on the front lines in America with our war of the rise of anti-Semitism, particularly on campuses and right in the heart of things. And you've been on the front lines of that. You've been courageous and brave. You've been outspoken. You've testified before Congress. You've led a lawsuit against Harvard. You really put your neck on the line in a lot of really, really meaningful ways. And for that and so much more, we are indebted. And I want to take this opportunity to begin by just saying thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here, and thank you for the obligatory Shabbos pun. And yes, as I'm sure we'll get into it, it's been very difficult, not just for me, but really for so many Jewish students here at Harvard and then across college campuses. But I was just on the phone with a colleague of mine, and we made it clear to ourselves that we are not stopping. This is only the beginning. And as long as they are chanting their hate and their bigotry, we will be on the front lines with our kippahs, with our Star of Davids, and we're not going anywhere.
Well, we appreciate that. It means the world. I wanted to get that Shabbos pun out of the way so we could just check that off and move on. So I'm glad that we did. Let's start with this question. What is the best way those who are not in Boston, not on the campus with you, can be helpful and supportive to you? There's a piece of me. We chartered a plane and participated in the rally in Washington. We're really proud of our community. We've done many missions to Israel. Been there. Each of us have been there many times since October 7th. If it's meaningful, we're going to, as much as, I'm a Yankee fan. I'm a New Yorker. Going to Boston is against almost everything I believe in. But it does not. I believe in the Jewish people and fighting anti-Semitism even more. And if it were meaningful, we were going to charter a plane and stand by your side and put on our Magen David and our yarmulke, and it's hard to find a bigger one than mine, we would stand right by you and by your side. Is that meaningful? And if it's not, give us and our listeners some ideas of what else we can be doing to help push the Shabbos Kestenbaums forward, to bolster you, to show you support, to give you continued courage.
Sure. Again, I really appreciate the question. Just by having me tonight, you're already doing far more than Harvard or MIT or Columbia ever has done, which is just listening to Jewish students. It is remarkable that for Jewish students to receive equity, equality, we have to go to the halls of Congress. We have to go to a court of law. It's very damning to the institutions of higher learning in the United States, but at the same time, it's really reassuring and refreshing that we have so many supporters outside of our communities who want to platform us, who want to amplify our message. So that's first and foremost what people can do. If you are a board member of a shul, if you are involved with your Jewish day school, ask yourself, have we platformed Jewish students on college campuses? Have we invited them to come speak? Have we heard from them directly? Because that's super important, just listening to what we have to say, because sometimes it feels like we're screaming at the top of our lungs and no one's reacting. So being on any platform is really just a breath of fresh air. It's not about me, but it's about the message. It's about there is a 5-alarm fire. And if you care about the vitality and the security and the stability of the American Jewish community, you have to listen to those, as you said, on the front line. So that's first and foremost. I would also say, look at Harvard, for example. If they wanted to change, they would have done it, right? There's nothing preventing them from implementing policies right now that would combat anti-Semitism. There's literally nothing that's stopping them from disciplining students or faculty engaged in anti-Semitism. They will only change if there's consistent outside public pressure. So if you are in a position of influence, which 3 of you are, or if you have a megaphone on social media or within your Dalet Amos, you can reach out to a member of Congress, you can talk to a faculty member at a university, you have a voice. I think what's really been empowering, I shouldn't say empowering, I should say a silver lining amidst this horror, is the fact that so many Jewish people have found that they have a voice, and just use it. Don't underestimate your own ability to affect change.
What about if people have a business, a company, I saw there were a group of federal judges who signed a letter to Columbia saying they will not take any law clerks from Columbia. Yeah. Should we encourage people who are influential in their business to also send such letters to Harvard and elsewhere saying we're going to condition our hiring?
I mean, 1,000%. If you're out there and you're like Ken Griffin and you can rescind a $300 million donation to Harvard, you should do it. But yes, in any small way, I thought the Columbia decision was excellent because it made a clear line in the sand that we would not tolerate this hate. We would not tolerate this hatred, bigotry, and discrimination in our workforce. We would not tolerate this under a court of law. So we are not going to hire people who come from an institution that spews propaganda and hate towards Jewish people. So yes, I would encourage, if you are donors to major Ivy League universities, number one, immediately rescind any donation you've given already, and then make a public pledge that you will not give any more. I would also argue, and this may not be my place, but take that money and spend it on a Jewish nonprofit, on your synagogue, on the Jewish day school, help with yeshiva tuition. I think one of the best things for the Jewish future would be having students in high school already coming into college who are already inspired to live their Jewish life, who are already inspired to defend the Jewish people and the Jewish state, as opposed to they're in college and they never really had a strong Jewish education, and now we're sort of fighting for their hearts and minds. But if we could mobilize these multi-billionaires and these Baalei Tzedakah to refocus their efforts on the Jewish community, as opposed to these Ivy League universities where Jewish students are being threatened, I mean, that would be amazing.
Wow. Are there people that are trying to do one thing, but they're doing the exact opposite? Like they're it's good intentions, but it's actually hurting you. Are there examples of like where people think they're doing good?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in the beginning, for those of you who remember, I'll shoot some background super quickly. People often ask me how anti-Semitism changed at Harvard post-October 7th. And the answer was there was no post-October 7th. There was on October 7th itself. I'm obviously Orthodox, I have my nice kippah. I don't use my phone on Shabbos, but I was very much using my phone on Shabbos, sorry to say that in front of the rabbis, to locate my loved ones. I have siblings who live in Israel, my nephew, my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, and I was momish texting them to see if they were alive or not. As I'm doing that, and as other Jewish students are doing that, we have 34 student groups at Harvard representing more than 1,000 students who are jumping out of their beds, some in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And the response to that was immediate. And this is where your question comes into play. There was an outside group, not affiliated with Harvard, not affiliated with any student, who took the names, which were public. This was a public statement that they signed to their now 60,000 followers on Instagram. And they took the names of these public signatures and they blasted a picture of their face on these billboard trucks that would just drive around Harvard for days on end. And I get where that passion came from. I get the idea of naming and shaming because, and Bill Ackman spoke about this, we don't want to make the mistake of hiring them in the future. At the same time, I don't think that was helpful because that was a distraction from how is it that a university that is allegedly trains the next generation of American thought leaders, religious leaders, politicians, you know, how can they have so many people who are celebrating October 7th? And we weren't really able to make that point because we had to defend that, hey, we don't support billboard trucks driving around with pictures of people's names. So.
Well, I just want to follow up on something you had said earlier. Rabbi Goldberg had mentioned what can people do, how can we be helpful to you? And you referenced that if you're in a position of authority, of power, if you have a mouthpiece, you're obligated to use it. I do feel a little bit as I'm listening to your passion and, you know, you follow on social media, the passion of so many students at Columbia and Harvard and MIT and so many wonderful institutions. Sometimes I feel like there is a little bit of a disconnect between what you're doing and what we're experiencing in our communities. By and large, our communities have given generously to Israel. We visited Israel. And we do a really great job of sitting around at our Shabbos table and lamenting, oh, what's going on college campuses. But I don't know that the average person really, like in their kishkas, feels like you called it a 5-alarm fire. If what you're saying is true, then we should be chartering planes and we should be mobilizing entire communities and we should be taking funds away from certain existing programs to be able to give and to educate and to make sure that we're protecting the college students on college campuses. Is there a disconnect, do you feel sometimes, between what you're experiencing at Harvard and let's take a community like Boca, like the relative safety, security that we experience here? And is there a way to bridge that gap? That it's not just the college students experiencing that on college campuses, but what you're experiencing on the front lines will directly impact our communities. It might not happen for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years when the students that you're combating are going to hit the workforce, but it will happen. And that's the bellwether for what's coming down the road. So do you feel that there's a little bit of a disconnect?
I do feel there's a disconnect, and I'll put it this way. I haven't been zoche to visit Boca yet, but although my uncle's a Chabad Shliach in Deerfield Beach, so not too far. And
Who's your uncle?
Yossi Goldblatt. Big shout out to Rabbi Yossi Goldblatt.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, good guy. So I haven't been to Boca, but I know Katz. I know the high school. This is not a criticism, chas v'sholom, of the high school, but given that it's a community school, I find it very, I'll be careful with my words, surprising that while we Jewish students are saying that Penn and Columbia and MIT and Harvard are physically and emotionally and spiritually dangerous for your kids, I find it surprising that Katz High School, or really most Jewish high schools, are celebrating, we're so proud of our graduating senior class because they're going to Harvard and MIT and Columbia and Penn. And for us who are there, we're sort of thinking, well, wait a minute, aren't you listening to what we're saying? It's one thing to say that we're going to send them there because they're going to fight and because we want them to be proud of their values and stand up. But it doesn't seem like that is what they're saying. And I'm happy to be proven wrong, but it does seem like there is this disconnect of, yes, we want to support our alumni who are on college campuses and we want to, tell them that we're standing tall with them. But at the same time, if you're just sending your kids, you're sending your students, you're sending your congregants to these universities, it's a little strange. And I went to SAR High School and I have only positive experiences and only reverence and respect to Rabbi Harkstark and Rabbi Kroll. And I had a conversation with Rabbi Harkstark. I was at a conference in Miami and I sort of said the same thing. I said, it's a little strange to celebrate seniors who are going into environments of hate, of indoctrination, of being challenged every single step of the way. And if you want to send your students there, that's great. But then you all have to also inculcate an awareness that they will be in a very, very difficult position on day one. So I do think there is this disconnect. And I do think, as I said in the beginning, the best way to bridge that gap is amplifying the voices of students.
But Shabbos, take what you're saying a little bit further, though. Would you discourage Jewish students from coming to these Ivy League? Are we ready? We had Sam Lesson on Behind the Bima. I don't know if you're familiar, you've worked with him at all in the efforts that he's making, a Harvard graduate who tried to get onto the board of governors and is not giving up. And that was the question we discussed with him is Harvard, our Ivy Leagues, are they irredeemable? Are we past the point of return? Can they be repaired? Have we lost them? And does the world look better if there are no Jews there? Is that a problem? Or should we fight to be there because we can't have a world in which there's no Jewish participation and contribution and no voice and no seat at the table in these places? So would you go so far as to say that I don't know if it's Orthodox students, all Jewish students, not only don't take pride they're coming here without saying they're coming to fight, don't come here. Rethink where you're going.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. First of all, let me say that as Jews, we are innovative, we are resourceful, we are smart. We don't need Harvard, Harvard needs us. And there are a lot of personal anecdotes, and there are also just empirical data that supports that. We really don't need the Ivy Leagues. The Ivy Leagues very much need their Jewish students. We also know that Harvard in its heyday was 25% Jewish, and today it's about 4% Jewish. It's not because Jews got dumber over time, it's because there was a deliberate decision to exclude Jews from the universities. So if you want to be part of the university, you have to realize, number one, they don't want you. I mean, that's very evident. We struggle to get a minyan every day. That's also because the Hillel and Chabad have two different minyanim, which is a conversation for another time. But we just don't have the numbers. That's number one. Number two, I've had literally dozens of conversations with prospective and admitted students in the past couple of months. And honestly, I can't think of a single conversation that ended with me saying, yeah, I think you should come here. For a whole bunch of reasons, and they weren't always the same reasons, but I mean, why should you come? If you can create a spreadsheet almost, if you can create a narrative where it makes sense for you to be here because you're going to fight and you're not going to sit down, you're not going to shut up, then that's one thing. But most of these students sort of just want an education and they just want to learn. And I don't think that's what the Jewish community needs. And to be fair on them, I don't think that's what they will be able to do. You know, part of our lawsuit, besides the fact that we allege pervasive and systemic anti-Semitism, we also allege just diminished educational opportunities. I haven't been able to learn because I have had to, number one, fight this cause, and number two, walk through hordes of students who are screaming at me, globalize the intifada, who are blocking off campus access. So I just want to sit and learn and do the things that I wanted to do when I got here, but I can't even do that. You know, Yeshiva University, which I'm not the biggest proponent of, but they kind of make a lot of sense in the last couple of months. Why would you want to sacrifice so much of your core values for reasons that don't make a lot of sense? As you said in the beginning, there are judges who aren't even hiring from Columbia anymore. There are judges who aren't even hiring from Harvard anymore. So the value of an Ivy League degree has plummeted numerously and explicitly in the last couple of months. So.
You make a really interesting point because, you know, until now, I've heard parents say, it's true, nobody should go to these Ivy Leagues. My child's different. They'll blend in. They'll be fine. They'll shush still. They'll be quiet. They'll graduate. It'll all work out for them. And what you're saying is the only excuse to be able to still go to an Ivy League is if part of your mission is to be on shlichus. If you're going there not just to get the education, but that's your mission, is to go fight, to be outspoken, to be a leader, to represent, to make sure that a Jewish voice is still there. That's such an interesting twist on it. And it puts an awesome responsibility on students and on the college guidance and on those parents that part of the formula of their decision making has to be not only will I be safe, can I navigate it, will I be okay, can I tolerate the hate, but can I stand up, will I have the courage, will I fulfill, will I rise to this mission? Because if not, you don't belong there.
Yeah, I absolutely. And again, this goes back to high school. This goes back to the responsibility on communities and the shuls and the schools and the families to create an awareness, number one, of the dangers that lie ahead, but much more importantly and much more fundamentally, creating a persona whereby you are inspired to live your Jewish values and you will not be intimidated by this mob, literally a mob of angry, anti-Western, anti-democratic, anti-Semitic students who don't believe that you and your people have a right to exist in their ancestral homeland. And again, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with the death threats that I receive on literally a weekly basis. I'm okay with the fact that I have private armed security outside my house when a faculty member threatened me with a machete. I'm okay with putting myself in the public spotlight. I'm okay with it. You know, my parents aren't okay with it. That's a different conversation. But is your kid okay with that? Are you okay with that? And I would imagine more often than not, the answer would be no, I'm actually not okay with that. And by the way, let me just say, just because I don't very often get to have a platform with three rabbis. We're talking about post-October 7th. We are not talking about, I went to Aish, so this is my kira for a second. We are not talking about the overwhelming amount of students who go off the derech in secular college. Like, that's a different conversation. But leaving aside the anti-Semitism, the idea that you can go on a secular college in 2024 and be that committed Jew who's just going to learn, I mean, those who can do it, you're my role model, but it is really difficult.
There's so much to unpack. You dropped a machete on us. Can you tell us a little bit about that story of the time you were threatened by a faculty member?
Yeah, machete guys. So it's pretty crazy now that I say it out loud. The night before the spring semester was to begin, I was walking through Harvard Yard and I noticed all of our hostage posters were vandalized, which is like a given. That's pretty normal because every single time I put up a hostage poster, it is vandalized in a couple hours. But this time was different. This time someone had written that Jews did 9/11, that Jews were best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, on Kfir Bibas, who's the now 1-year-old baby being held hostage in the Gaza terror tunnel. He had written, his head is still on, where's the evidence? So I immediately report that to DEI, to the president, to everyone and anyone at Harvard. Obviously, no one responds. I go on Fox News. 2 hours later, there's a response. So the next morning, I get an email from this faculty member. I had no idea who he was. I'd never interacted with him ever. And he admits to doing it. And then he challenges me to debate him in a secluded underpass as to whether Jews were involved in 9/11. This is a faculty member who not only graduated from Harvard College, but has been a faculty member at Harvard for 26 years. Later that night, it gets better. Later that night, I get these frantic texts from professors and from friends saying, have you seen his social media? And they send me a link, and he's waving a machete with a picture of my face, also Alan Dershowitz, saying that he wants to fight and he wants to bring down the Zionist mafia. And with my legal team, I told them what was happening, and I also contacted the police. And they said, go inside, lock the door. And they sent me private armed security, which I had outside my house 24/7, literally for 7 days. When I went to Chabad Friday night to daven, I had a guy with a gun follow me to make sure I was safe. And by the way, this is the best part. This happened 3-4 months ago. Harvard was aware of all of it. To this day, they have not once acknowledged to me my complaints. They have not acknowledged that this has happened. They have not told me whether he is employed. They have not told me whether he has access to campus. It was only after I got my own congressman, Ritchie Torres, to write a public letter. This is only after I spoke in front of Congress, after I went on Fox and CNN, months and months of public pressure, did they finally fire him. And by the way, I only know that they fired him because of his own social media and what he posted, not because Harvard said, we are so sorry that this happened, we are so concerned, and we are terminating his employment. And the kicker is, when did they fire him? 4 days ago. This is someone who threatened the life of a Jewish student. He was only fired 4 days ago. And when he was fired, you could go on his social media. His social media account is literally called the 9/11 guy. And he's been working at Harvard for 26 years. He threatened me again 4 days ago, saying that he is coming after me. He is coming for more than blood, but he is coming for the whole Zionist regime, and he's coming with a posse that no one can stop. These are ongoing threats that I'm facing. And again, I'm okay with it because I like the fact that I can publicize, we're not exaggerating, we're not making this up. Look at the reality of being a Jew at Harvard in 2024. But if you don't want your son or daughter to be exposed to a Harvard employee waving a machete and shouting 9/11 conspiracy theories, then you have to seriously consider whether Harvard or MIT or Columbia or Penn is a safe, viable option for your child.
It's simply, you're telling the story and it's simply not believable. If you were telling me I have a great idea for a fiction, a book, we're gonna make a movie and pretend there's a Jewish student at Harvard and there's a professor and Harvard does nothing, you wouldn't sell it. It's just not.
Rabbi, that was my point earlier with the disconnect, because I think we're like, oh yeah, this bad stuff's happening on Harvard, and we see like the tents and the camps and the screaming, and we're like, yeah, it's horrible, it's horrible. I don't think, I'll speak for myself. I don't think me, my family, my network of friends, like fully appreciates the level of toxicity and threat that you're describing right now.
I would actually, first of all, let me just say he's not a professor, he's a faculty member, but I would also add that when there are stories coming out from Harvard, it's because we as Harvard students got those stories out. So last week, for example, when the New York Post had on their front cover, Harvard has fallen, and it was a picture of all the Hamasniks on campus at the Harvard Hamas homeless shelter, when they replaced the American flag with the Palestinian flag, we took pictures of it and we sent it out to the media. So everything you're seeing is what the media decides to publish because it's what we've given them. But that's only a fraction of what's actually happening. There are many things either that we just couldn't record, we couldn't get pictures of, or the media is not interested in publicizing. So for example, when I had last year a class called, it was called Settler Colonialism, Nationalism, Nationalism, and Religion, the case of Israel-Palestine, when I had professors state as a matter of fact that the treatment of Palestinians by Jews is comparable to that of, the treatment of Palestinians by Jews is comparable to the treatment of Nazis at the hands of Jews. It's comparable because the Jews had to wear Stars of David and the Palestinians had different colored passports. that might be interesting as an anecdote, but that's not like a picture I can take. That's not an article you could write about. When I'm in a film screening on campus attended by the dean of the school, where they say that the Jews have internalized the ways of Nazi Germany, and a former spokesman of the PLO is a panelist at this film screening and saying on Harvard property that she never understood how Jews could be so terrible until she visited Auschwitz, and then it made sense because we've internalized the ways of Nazi Germany, and that is received by thunderous applause by the dean, by the department heads, by the students. Those things are happening. I was in that room. I can tell you as a matter of fact that occurred, but it's not going to make the front page because it's just so normalized and people are not interested in publishing it. So I would argue that it's actually a lot worse than people are being led to believe.
Can I just ask a question? I have a senior right now. My son's he's a senior, and the only school he applied to was YU after his yeshiva year. But I'm actually looking, and I couldn't find it. I just found it. There was a letter that went out to the schools on November 3rd. It was a Friday. It was Erev Shabbos, November 3rd. I guess this was right after what happened probably in Harvard when there was a lot of concern. And this letter is signed by, it looks like the heads of schools of maybe 40 different yeshiva high schools in New York and Chicago, Florida, all over the country, Canada, I see over here, basically saying that, we're obviously concerned, and we put together a new coalition of heads of schools of every one of these places. And we're going to ensure that we're going to be in touch with all of them, and we're not going to let them into our yeshivas unless we can be assured that they're safe for our Jewish students. Now, I don't know who they're talking to because I'm a parent of a senior. And unless maybe I'm not on the list of people to communicate with because my son only applied to YU, but I'm pretty sure that's not the case. I haven't seen one email going out since the beginning of November, when things have certainly gotten a lot worse, that what do you know anything about this coalition of heads of schools that said they're going to make a difference? I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, all I know is that Rabbi Kahn went on Fox News probably around November time, Rabbi Kahn of TABC, to talk about this. I was not aware that there's a coalition. And as I said, I'm happy to be proven wrong. I'm happy for my high school, SAR and Ramaz and Frisch and Heschel and all these places to state that publicly. But look, if you are I
think it's pretty public. I think all those schools you just mentioned are on this list. It's a public letter that went out.
Okay, then
But it went out in November.
Good.
When things were scary, but now things are at a different planet. It's funny. If you read this letter, you're like, oh, we were so concerned then. I wasn't really concerned then. And now I'm really concerned. And I haven't heard anything since then.
Right. So then I would hope that whichever high school signed on to this letter, I would hope that they would not allow any college recruiters within 50 feet of their school property. I would hope that these high schools who signed on to this letter would not allow college recruiters to interact with their students, because as you said, it's only gotten worse. I was in DC yesterday, and I met with the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, a terrific guy. And he told me, he asked me, since Claudine Gay was resigned, she was fired, what has it been like since? And the answer is it's only gotten worse. On a private social media site called SciChat, which is reserved for Harvard students, in order to be admitted onto the site, you have to show you're an active Harvard student. Students were writing that, quote, there are too many damn Jews in this country, that Jews control the media, that Jews pushed a black woman out of her position. Just last night, someone posted, again, these are Harvard students, people we sit in classrooms with, people we share study halls with. Someone had written to a Jewish student that, I hope your family was kidnapped, and I hope that Hamas killed all of the hostages. These are people we're sitting next to in classrooms. These are meant to be the future leaders of the United States. If these are the future leaders, then I can tell you America is in deep, deep trouble. We are in a serious inflection point in our country, and the Jewish high schools should be the first ones to stand up, not just in a letter, but in action. May is definitely college recruiting season, and I know when I was in high school, around May was when we had college night, when all of those universities would come into our building. I cannot fathom, and I cannot understand, and maybe they're not doing it, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I cannot understand if SAR would allow a Harvard admissions rep into their building. I just don't get it. Just an hour ago, before I logged on to this call, I walked through Harvard Yard, and at least 300 students were chanting, Palestine will be Arab and globalize the Intifada. Why are we normalizing this, and why are we encouraging our students to go to these universities? Even if they do want to fight, why should they be exposed to this filth?
It's not right. It's a very low bar. It's a very, very low way that
Wow.
we can contribute to this fight is to, I mean, you talk about a level of insensitivity is to invite the enemy into your own home, and it's a very small show of support to simply say that if you're mistreating our students who are there, don't come try to recruit new ones. You're not welcome. You're not allowed. Shabbos, fill us in. Where are we with this lawsuit? What does victory look like? What are the chances of victory? What are you hoping to accomplish? What does it look like, right? Hoping that the university comes in, and all these universities shut down. A lot of agitators have come in. It's not all students. We know now how it's funded, and we don't need to talk about that. But hopefully they just need to enforce the laws and shut down these mini Gazas. And that's obvious, sort of not simple, but simple. But the more systemic issues in terms of these students, these professors, these ideologies. How does this lawsuit impact that? What does victory look like? Is it redeemable?
Sure. So first of all, you mentioned the mini Gazas. I just want to say I officially coined the term the Harvard Hamas homeless shelter, and Ben Shapiro said it on his podcast. So that's my claim to fame. First and foremost, Jews are not asking for special treatment under the law. We are asking for equal treatment under the law. We want Harvard to discipline and to punish anti-Semitism in the same exact way that they discipline and punish all forms or other forms of hatred, discrimination, and bigotry. That is the fundamental piece of our lawsuit. When I was accepted to Harvard 2 years ago, my reaction was not great, now I can sue the university. My reaction was great, now I can be in a pluralistic, non-sectarian environment where I can not only contribute my Orthodox identity, but also to receive, to be in this warm, welcoming environment. It was not, now I can sue them. But unfortunately, we were put into this position because time and time again, Harvard, kind of like the Palestinians, never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. They've either been unable or unwilling to meaningfully change their ways. So victories kind of manifests in two different ways. One is the exact things we're asking for in our lawsuit. So number one, we are asking for damages, punitive damages, and also full tuition reimbursements. We are not paying a single dollar to an institution that stabbed Jews in the back repeatedly. It is absolutely absurd that it's gotten to this point, but we are not backing down, and we are going to make sure that Harvard is held accountable in that sense. We also want to make sure that there's a federal monitor on Harvard's campus to make sure that they're complying with their Title VI obligations. For those who don't know, Title VI is a component of the Civil Rights Act that prohibits discrimination by universities, or especially universities that receive federal dollars, which is another issue we could talk about, from discriminating a whole host of identities, including Jews or religion. So we want them to comply with that. We also want them to acknowledge that there's been a breach of contract, the contract that I've engaged in as a student. I've had diminished educational opportunities. As I mentioned, I've had to miss class. At many times, I've been scared to walk through the campus. I had, as we spoke about, this machete guy. That is not a normal sign of a functioning democracy or a functioning institution of higher learning when Jews need to hire outside security to follow them to Chabad to daven because a faculty member with a machete is yelling about 9/11. So that is one part of the victory. The court grants us exactly what we are asking for. And the other part, which isn't necessarily the lawsuit, but this is just activism, is the court of public opinion. If we can create a culture or national pushback whereby society, Jew or non-Jew, black, white, it doesn't matter, whereby we repudiate the values that are coming from these universities, that of anti-Americanism, anti-Westernism, anti-Semitism. If we can repudiate that and say that Harvard and MIT and Columbia, they do not represent our values, I think that would be incredibly powerful. And I would argue the lawsuit is super important and we are not backing down, but the court of public opinion is also important. And it goes back to the very first thing I said, amplify the voices of students. We are the ones who, yes, we're not in Gaza. We are not fighting with machinery or tanks and weapons, but we are fighting on the battlefront of ideas. And that is a battle that's being fought 24/7. And you have to have an active role in that. Everyone in the Jewish community across this country needs to have skin in the game, whether that means supporting Jewish students and listening to them, whether it means talking to administrators or universities, whether it means barring them from your synagogue or to your high school. Everyone needs to have skin in the game, and we will be far more effective in that, even if we win everything in our lawsuit.
What's the timing of the lawsuit? Where you're holding with it? How is it being funded? Is there need for help with that?
Sure.
So can I just add also here? I saw Alan Dershowitz on the news 2 nights ago where he was saying that he's representing any Jew that is attacked. I believe he has a new organization. He has something where he is going after. Yeah, he will. Exactly. He will sue you. He said on the news, I will take their homes. I will take their livelihood. I will take them down.
Yeah, Alan. Mr. Dershowitz. He's been a big supporter of the Jewish community here at Harvard. He's not part of this. He's not representing us, but if he wants to, he knows where to find me. But yeah, his whole attitude is heard a Jew, we sue. So our lawsuit was filed in mid-January. I think it's also important to tell everyone that throughout this entire process, I told my legal team that should Harvard change course, we're not going to file the lawsuit because there would be no need. I don't want to do this. I don't want to go to court. I don't want to have to be deposed. I don't want to have to be very careful with what I'm saying because sort of like Law and Order, everything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. I'm a 24-year-old. What do I know? But the reality was someone had to do it because Harvard has been so unable or unwilling to mend the clear danger and pervasive and systemic anti-Semitism. So we filed the lawsuit in mid-January. Harvard filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice about 4 weeks ago, totally taking zero responsibility. They had a 40-page ridiculous argument saying, well, look at all of our statements and look at our task forces and look at our condemnation. I mean, total joke. You can all read it. It's all online. I mean, read it. And then we responded right before Pesach, essentially saying that actions speak louder than words. And how can you, in a straight face, say that we are taking meaningful steps when literally an hour ago, I'm walking through Harvard Yard and I have individuals who are recording me and following me and intimidating me while screaming Palestine is Arab and globalize the Intifada. What a joke. So Moskowitz Benson Torres is representing us. They actually used to represent Donald Trump. So that's a pretty cool. I now say that me and President Trump have the same legal team, which is pretty not really true, but it sounds cool. And we are being funded. I want to be careful with my words. We have a generous supporter, but we always would welcome more supporters. So you can definitely just Google Moskowitz Benson Torres and there are ways to get involved and support us. And then a judge will decide. May 30th, a judge will hear both of the motions to dismiss our lawsuit and also our response against the dismissal of our lawsuit, and that could take a couple of months. We're very confident that this will go to trial, at which point I will be deposed, but also I'm going to ask a lot of things from Harvard. We will enter a period of discovery where we want to know exactly among other things, where is the money being spent that you are getting from Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Russia and China? Why is it that you haven't meaningfully taken action against students who are engaged in anti-Semitism? Why is it that the Center of Middle Eastern Studies is being propagated by Hamas supporters and include speakers who literally appear on panels with Hamas members? Why is that? So there are a lot of documents that we are going to request from Harvard, and Harvard should be scared. I'll just end on this last note. I've been told, and I don't know if this is true, but I've been told that the same legal team that represented and helped Claudine Gay prepare for her disastrous congressional testimony is the same legal team that's helping Harvard with their current suit against us. If that's the case, I feel very confident about our chances.
Wow. Is there a way for them to settle with you to avoid the discovery?
Yeah, absolutely. They could settle with us right now if they wanted to. Harvard should be scared because they're in the wrong. I have nothing to apologize for. I'm not in the defensive position here. I will not apologize for other people's bigotry, hatred, and discrimination. Harvard knows that there is a lot that they do not want to be out there in the public. You know, my lawyers always tell me, be very careful because any email you send, any appearance you go on, that will be used against you. And I say, great. I want Harvard to see the emails where my parents say, we want you to come home. I want Harvard to see the text messages where Jewish students say, I don't feel safe anymore. I have to take the semester off. I want Harvard to see that. And if Harvard wants me to expose that to the world, bring it on, because they just want to kick the can down the road and pretend that everything is fine and take no responsibility. If that's the game you want to play, I'm not going anywhere.
Shabbos, tell us about you a little bit, because I know that, first of all, about your background. Where do you get the courage? You know, who's your mentor? Who's your role model? Who inspired you in this? Is it a parent? Is it a grandparent? Is it part of your personal history? Is there a rabbi? Is there a teacher? Is there a biography that you read? This is your moment. And like Esther had her moment, this is your moment. And I don't think you have to wonder why you ended up at Harvard. It's sort of clear to all of us why Hashem and our people need you there. So where does it come from that you're rising in this moment? And you will be able to always look back and please guide your generation to come and say, when I was called upon, just like, you know, those in Israel who answered their moment and their call, you're at a different front lines, you're answering yours. Where does that come from in your history?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for that. I wouldn't say what I'm doing is courageous. And I'm not saying that to, you know, I'm really looking for compliments here. I mean that in a very serious way. What I'm not particularly articulate and I'm not particularly intelligent. All I'm doing is pointing out problems. What I am doing.
You did get into Harvard.
All right. What I am doing can be replicated by anyone and everyone. Just don't be intimidated. That's the one thing. So I don't think it's courage. I just think it's a lack of intimidation. That's one thing. In terms of my background, I'm a first-generation American. I was born not only to love this country, but also to love my Jewish values. I'm a proud Orthodox Jew, and I never saw those two things as contradictory. On the contrary, I saw being an American and being Jewish as complementary and a beautiful synthesis of two values. And I wanted to share those values at Harvard University. So that's number one. My parents are both British. My dad started the first auction house in America specializing in rare Judaica. So I grew up in a house surrounded by 16th century Sfarim, Kestenbaum and Company, very cool stuff.
Can I get those emails? How do I get on the? Can you ask him how I got on that email list?
It's a good email list. It's a good email list. So very cool stuff. My dad just sold. I'm very into Hasidus, so he just sold the Gartel of the. I think it was either the Ribnitzer or the Vizhnitzer Rebbe. So I got to hold the Gartel. It was very cool. Anyways, so when you grow up in a house surrounded with 16th century Sfarim, you grow an appreciation for Jewish history, Jewish culture, and the religion of Judaism. And that's where I got my bren for Judaism from. The Hasidus aspect really only began when I was 18. I knew I always wanted to go to Poland, and my parents said you have to wait till you're 18. So I went to Poland, and I just fell in love with Poland, but also the Kotzker Rebbe. I went to Kotzk. The background of my phone has been the kever of the Kotzker Rebbe for like 6 years now. And I've been back to Poland about 25 times. I work with rebuilding the Jewish life there. I've also cleaned up cemeteries there. And I work with the aging but strong and dynamic Holocaust survivor community there. And as I said, my parents, my mom especially, who I'm very close to, and I don't know if she watches this, but hi Mom, and you're great, and thank you for everything. She always taught me the values of standing up for what you believe in. And for those of you who know her, she teaches at SAR. She is the most patient and kind and calm woman you'll probably ever meet. And she was a bit disappointed in me, actually, because last week I went to the MIT encampment and 7 people with masks and keffiyehs blocked me from going. And, this was retweeted by Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro. And, I said some not nice words, some potty words, but I got very, very angry. And she said, kind of like when Michelle Obama said, when they go low, you go high, never to give in to them. So my background, it's a little unusual, but at the same time, I'm really fortunate that I grew up in the house that I did. I'm one of 7 siblings. We're all very different. Some of us live in Israel. Some still live here in the US. Some are serving in the army. Some are in law school. And then there's me doing my thing. But that's sort of my background. And in terms of my role model, besides my parents, Daniel and Hadassah Kestenbaum, this is going to sound really cliche and corny and stereotypical, but it is the Kotzker Rebbe. His quest for authenticity, his passion for truth, as Heschel would call it, has been so inspiring for me. And I go to a university whose motto is Veritas, which is Latin for truth. And unfortunately, truth is something that is so hard to find at Harvard, and is so difficult to bring out from your professors. And if I can make the Kotzker Rebbe, who I know would hate me and hate the fact that I'm mentioning his name and would hate the fact that I consider myself a follower of his, but if I can make the Kotzker Rebbe proud and try to bring a little truth into this university and a little truth back to my Jewish community, I think he'll be very proud. And hopefully my parents are proud of me as well.
Wow. You mentioned you were in Washington. And you were in front of the House Judiciary Committee, the Ways and Means Committee. Your visits there are educational, to educate them about what's going on at Harvard. It's to create friendships, meetings. What's the purpose of those trips? And how can people be more involved in some of those efforts on Capitol Hill?
Sure. So it's kind of twofold. The first is I gave testimony in front of the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. They asked me to come, so that was, just fulfilling my obligation. The House Judiciary Committee has also asked me to come, and I'll speak in front of them, I think next week. And then the other committees, like House Ways and Means, sort of similarly, they want to really understand what's happening at Harvard and across college campuses, and I'm happy to let them know. Congress, I'll say something I shouldn't say, and then just hear me out. I've been a registered Democrat since I turned 18. Again, don't judge me. I voted for Bernie Sanders twice. I'm doing my teshuva, don't worry, but I'm happy to compare my progressive credentials any day of the week. I march for Black Lives Matter. I march for the LGBTQ+ community, for abortion rights. This is not a part, and by the way, I'm not that liberal progressive anymore. Don't worry. But this is not a partisan issue, and I've made friends on both sides of the aisle. Republicans and Democrats. And when I say people like Jason Smith and Elise Stefanik and Richie Torres and Virginia Fox and Burgess Owens, when I say that they are the most powerful advocates for the Jewish people, not just in the United States, but in the world, I mean that seriously. These people have a neshama that I hope to have. They have a dedication to the Jewish community that I hope to have. These are remarkable individuals and remarkable policymakers. And in addition to having their personal support, they're also putting the legislative pressure on Congress. So for example, why should Harvard have a tax exempt status? Why should Harvard be given hundreds of millions of dollars every single year? Why should Harvard not be forced to deport students engaged in anti-Semitism and violating the law? So all of these policymakers want to create legislation and want to enforce the policies already on the books. So part of what I'm doing is education. It's also building relationships. And as I said, it's not a partisan issue. So regardless of your politics, you should call up people like Richie Torres and Elise Stefanik. You should thank Kathy Manning and Virginia Fox, because the bipartisan nature is so overwhelming and so beautiful, but also cannot be taken for granted. So every time I walk through the halls of Congress, I always make sure to stop at people's offices, and whether I'm speaking to the policymaker themselves or their team, just expressing my Hakara Satov and seeing them have hostage posters, seeing them with their necklace. When I put up a hostage poster at Harvard, it's torn down in 30 seconds, but in Congress, it's there for months and months, and it's just so beautiful to see.
That was so well said, and we agree wholeheartedly. That's what our shul stands for too. Many of the names you've mentioned have spoken in our shul or have been in Behind the Bima, and we absolutely agree and believe in that. But you touched on something that I'd love to talk about, maybe even wind down with, which is this radical shift that you made. You defined yourself, your progressive credentials could compete with anybody, and the people you aligned with who you no longer do. Walk us through what that was like, to feel your identity intertwined with movements who then betrayed and stabbed in the back and abandoned. What's that like, to be willing to be honest about that? Because there's a world of people today, some of whom are not honest about it, have yet to admit it. Others of whom are admitted it and therefore are confused by it and don't know where to go next or who they really are, what's left of their Judaism, when Judaism is those things. And you had an independent Judaism, right? Because you were a practicing and knowledgeable and curious Jew, right? Seeming independent or parallel to those other forms of activism you were doing. But for some, that was their Judaism. Were these movements. How did you, was this October 7th? Was it before that you began to realize that these aren't who I am and what I'm about or where I should be? These aren't people who will be there for me. How did you come to grips with that? What does that mean? Do you have a message to others who were part of those communities who now feel lost or ideologically homeless, or as one prominently put on Twitter recently, hashkafically homeless?
That was gonna be my line. I was gonna say, I think Bashevkin wrote, hashkafically homeless, so I'm politically homeless.
A commentator of his wrote that, but yeah, we had that conversation about what we're doing to create space for the people who are lost. But first, take us through your journey, and then what would you advise people who might feel lost?
Sure. So it was Martin Luther King who said that we're not going to remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And that, I would argue, has probably been the hardest part of all this. It's not that they're anti-Semites, because we knew that. It's not that there are people who don't believe in the right for the state of Israel to exist, because we knew that. It's our classmates, it's our professors, it's our role models, it's our politicians, people who we voted for who agree. That's been the worst part. So my political trajectory is still ongoing and it's still evolving. I will be honest, I'm still a registered Democrat. And I don't, at least in the foreseeable future, plan on switching. When I was 17 years old, I was a student delegate at the Democratic National Convention, and I got connected with Rabbi Uri Pilichowski, who very much encouraged me to wave an Israeli flag, and I did. And I was on the floor of the Democratic Convention with my 8-foot Israeli flag, and I was called a terrorist a terrorist sympathizer. And I remember giving an interview after that saying, look, I'm a progressive. I believe in a lot of these policies, but I, as a 17-year-old, am acknowledging that there is this far left, anti-democratic segment within our party that we must root out. You asked me, is the answer acquiescing to this mob? Is the answer to abandon the Ivy Leagues? I don't think the answer is to abandon the Democratic Party, because like it or not, roughly 50% of the country are Democrats, and roughly 50% of the country will vote for candidates that we may not support anymore. But for us to abandon that, I think is really dangerous, and I think it's also very short-sighted. At the same time, it was Colin Powell who said that the former Secretary of State, who of course was African American, he was asked why he remained a registered Republican. And he basically said, because it forces the Republican Party to contend with the fact that there are people like me on their team. So being a staunch progressive, being a somewhat liberal, but also wearing a kippah, and also have siblings who serve in the IDF, forces the Democratic Party to contend with the fact that there are people like me who are in that party and aren't going anywhere. It's easy for me to just say Trump 2024 and I throw in the towel and I'm moving to Mar-a-Lago. It's easy for me to do that because I know I'll be welcomed with open arms, but I'm not ready to give up on this party. It's also critical to remember that I did not change. The Democratic Party changed. My values are still more or less the same values. It's just the individuals have gone astray, but I'm not going to leave them just yet. At the same time, I am not naive. I don't want to get all these angry emails after this podcast ends of, oh, well, did you see Ilhan Omar tweeted this and Rashida? I know that. I'm with you. I stopped off at Rashida Tlaib's office last night to tell her not her staff to tell her just that. I'm aware of it. But look, at the end of the day, there's certain policy positions that I fundamentally disagree with the conservative viewpoint on. And my message to young people who are figuring it out is you have to be intellectually honest. Don't vote for a candidate because there's a D or there's an R next to their name. Ask questions and don't blindly follow a candidate for one particular issue. Look, I'm going to have a very difficult time, as many Jews will be, on the 2024 election, who will be voting for. I myself don't know who I'll be voting for, but have those conversations, engage in dialogue, speak to those role models, because you're doing the right thing by just being vulnerable to engage in exploration of ideology.
I just want to push you on one point. I know Rabbi Broide wants to jump in as also a registered Democrat, but I want to push you on one point.
50% of this panel is Democrats. Just
there
like
you go.
Oh, you have no idea what I am.
We couldn't agree more, by the way. The pro-Israel Jewish community couldn't be more grateful that we have a John Fetterman. We couldn't be more grateful. Our congressman, Jared Moskowitz, has been fantastic. And, his predecessor, Ted Deutsch, is a dear friend, is amazing. So 100% it's not based on party lines. And we have good friends and champions on both sides of the aisle. We need to support them and keep it that way. What I guess I'm curious about, and I've been thinking a lot about, and I don't mean to be controversial in any way, but I'm reflecting, and maybe I should reflect more about myself than expected of others. But, when some were marching with Black Lives Matter, others were saying, be careful, they're anti-Semitic, their website, their origins, some of the people and how they align. And those who said that, were called names and were accused of certain things. Now that they've sort of been exposed for who they are, do the people who marched with them, I don't want to say an apology, but is there an important moment to say, look, we were wrong, you were right, or we shouldn't have accused you of those things just because you were raising that issue. You saw it before we did, but now it's been clear. Is it enough to pit? I'm not saying this about you in particular. You've heard how we feel about you and how grateful we are. I don't mean to put you on the spot. But is there, and I'm sure, by the way, that others have other things that they need to take responsibility. I don't think there's been enough self-reflection after Corona policies. There's a lot of reflection that's missing. We're always so quick to move on and call on others to reflect. But here, the people or the denominations within Judaism who so embraced and so aligned with movements that it turns out betrayed us, were the antithesis of us, right now are aligned with our enemies, calling for our destruction. Is there a crucial point where before things, readjust, there's just a moment that says, we got that one wrong, sorry?
Yeah. No, it's an interesting question. I'd say this anecdotally. Before Harvard, for undergrad, I was at Queens College, and I was the Hillel president, and I was on the student senate. I was very involved. And there was a speaker, Tamika Mallory, who was invited to campus. And for those who don't know, she is just a noted anti-Semite. This is someone who, applauded Louis Farrakhan. And I said, this is during the height of Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement. I said, we can agree with the principles of Black Lives Matter. I'm someone who does believe that in some cases there is systemic racism. I'm also someone who believes that in some cases there are patriarchal structures within our society. But we can also disavow the movement without disavowing some of the ideas. And that's what I did. I said, we can't have an anti-Semite like Tamika Mallory be embraced on our campus because she marches for Black Lives Matter. That's unacceptable. So I think you can, walk and chew gum at the same time. That's number one. Number two, the point you're raising is really important as it pertains to the vitality and security and stability of American Jewry in the future. A significant part of the encampments, which I don't think we really spoke about, but the encampments at Harvard and across college campuses are being led by Jews. These are Jews who are wearing talesim and tefillin, obviously improperly, and they got it all wrong. But they're wearing talesim. They're singing, Lo Yisa Goya Goya Cherev. They went to Hebrew school. And we have to recognize, and to be fair, many in the Reform movement have been speaking about this more openly, but we have to recognize that there has been a profound failure, less so orthodoxy, but a profound failure in more progressive denominations of Judaism. And I'm saying this as someone who worked at a humanist Jewish day school, profound failures to educate young Jews on the values of Jewish identity and the Jewish homeland. And unless we can address that now and comprehensively, it's only going to get worse. So in terms of your question of, has there been this introspection, this reflection that we may have gotten things wrong? Yeah, I think so. I think, to be fair, people were saying that before October 7th anyways. But certainly after October 7th, it's been a lot more obvious because, yeah, I can't march with the Black Lives Matter people anymore. I cannot march and support my fellow classmates because I see the things they say on campus and the things they post on social media and the marches that they attend. And no way can I associate myself with them anymore. That doesn't mean I negate some of the other ideas that they happen to also espouse, like addressing climate change or, universal health care. But it doesn't mean that, you have to go all in with all of their ideas, because these are very dangerous.
Just to get myself in trouble and to be equal in the other direction, I think the Orthodox community, or segments of it, have a major moment of introspection also of having deified certain political personalities and embraced them wholeheartedly and elevated, to some stature, which was inappropriate. And I think there needs to be nuance on all directions and a little bit more thoughtfulness and care and concern and being judicious in who we elevate and with whom we align and what we confuse. And really, it's could go back to the Kotzker. If we stay true to Torah and Torah guides us, we're not going to fall prey to these other movements of sort of elevating or embracing or leaning into them wholeheartedly more than Torah. Torah is that unique guide, which does overlap with other things. And in those places of overlap, we should, but we have to be much more careful on all sides and in all directions and in what we do and how we do it. And I think there are those moments which seem to be missing in all directions. And I don't know if there'll be a pause for everybody to be able to share. I think it'd be much healthier for all of us if there was. Rabbi Moskowitz, Rabbi Broide, any last
Can I just quickly
questions?
say my 30-second Trump story? Just because you mentioned it, I met Trump once, actually twice, but the first time I actually had a conversation with him, and I was with a group of young Jewish teenagers, and I said, do you have a message for them? This was over Pesach, and I said, it's the holiday of Passover, they're in high school, what message do you want to say? And he said, Jews, my best lawyers are all Jewish. And, that was his message. And I think it's the Rambam who says that you have to accept truth from any source. And I think we can, even if you support Trump, I think we can also acknowledge that there's some things he says that should make us a little uncomfortable. And there are some things that he says that we should push back a little bit on. I think that's probably a really good example, because that's a very odd thing to tell a group of young Jewish people, even though it's philo-Semitism and not anti-Semitism. But still, get out of your political partisan bubble. And this movement, the anti-Semitism that we're fighting on college campuses, is the perfect example. You're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're voting for Biden, Trump, Bernie, it doesn't matter. You should not be okay with the fact that Jewish students are hiding their yarmulkes at Harvard University, regardless of your political affiliation.
As much as a wake-up call it is for you and others to say, I guess Black Lives Matter are not who I thought they were. You know how many Republicans, staunch Orthodox or other Republicans, who swore against the Democratic Party, who had the most horrific things to say about John Fetterman and how he could even be a candidate or how he could represent or how he could appear in that outfit. And now every one of us want to honor him at our shul dinner. We glorify him. We love him. We want to honor. So it's a huge wake-up call and a message for all of us about being a lot more slow, deliberate, careful in the judgments that we make and with whom we align and the conclusions we reach and the rhetoric that we share in all directions. There is, I think, that moment or that takeaway from this too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if Reverend Broide wanted to speak earlier, but what would your message be to an 11th grade, 12th grader in high school? We've spoken about college campuses, whether to go to Harvard, MIT, Columbia, whether to go to YU. Obviously, that's going to be a specific to each family, and we've spoken about that. But in terms of Jewish identity, right? Forget college campuses. Let's say you're an 11th grader, a 12th grader, and you're figuring life out and you're figuring your Judaism out and you're figuring out where you fit into the world. What would you tell yourself 5-6 years ago to prepare yourself, again, forget college campuses for a second, just for a life where your Judaism and your values are going to be under constant threat. And obviously you're very intelligent, you're very articulate, and you have a lot of, azas to kedusha, you have a lot of healthy, and I mean this in the best way possible, like a holy pride of your Judaism. But a lot of kids don't have that, and they don't have that background, and they don't have that confidence. What could they be doing in 11th, 12th, 10th grade to prepare themselves for what our parents would have called the real world, right? When you go out there and your Judaism is going to be threatened, and you're going to be in the values that you assumed everyone agrees with, all of a sudden you're going to realize not everyone agrees with them and people vehemently disagree with them. What are some things? Is it reading? Are there books you would recommend? Is there a podcast you listen to? What are some things that teenagers could do to prepare themselves for that world out there?
I can state unequivocally that if it was not for my 2 years in Israel, learning and growing and being passionate about my Jewish identity, I would not be the person that I am today. Not just the lawsuit and not just going on Fox News, but being passionate and being well educated on my Jewish identity. I work with NCSY and then its Southern Fellowship and all sorts of different programs that all sort of have the same goal of education, and education through experience. If you're a young person, you have to understand that, number one, after high school, you go to Israel for a year minimum. I mean, that just goes without saying. In the same way that before you buy a phone, you want to make sure that you do your homework and you're buying the iPhone 11 versus the 10 because this has a Retina display and this is 4G and this is LTE. Do your homework. You can't go on a college campus, and I'll sound like a Hasbara activist for a second. You can't defend the state of Israel if you've never been there. I once I led a yeshiva Nevaseret. I led them to Poland last month. And I spoke about this idea that Maseches Makos, which I never actually finished, but I didn't tell them that. But I said I think it's the first parak of Maseches Makos. It talks about what does it mean to be an Edom Zominim, this false witness, I guess is how it's translated. And one of the ways that you're classified as this ineligible or false witness is if you weren't actually there. If you testify that I saw so-and-so, but you weren't there, then you can't be a qualified witness. So too, you can't go on a college campus and say that the land of Israel is my homeland and you've never been there. And you can't say that, my ancestors fought for my right to be here and you've never actually toured the 1,000 years of Jewish life in Poland, or you've never been in a yeshiva. There's a great story of Rav Aaron Leib Steinman that I'll say in 20 seconds and then cut me off if it's too long, but 20 seconds, okay? Rav Aaron Leib Steinman was also one of my heroes. He died at the age of 103. He weighed like 60 pounds. And one day there was a businessman in Bnei Brak who wanted to buy a sports car because it was improper for him in all these high-end business meetings to appear in his beat-up station wagon. But his wife, who lived, of course, they're living in Bnei Brak, said it wouldn't be proper. Ask Rav Aaron Leib Steinman. So he asks Rav Aaron Leib Steinman, can I buy my sports car, or will it cause people to be jealous? And Rav Steinman said, how many times have you finished Shas? The Gemara. He says, what? He says, how many times have you finished Shas? He said, never. I'm super busy. I'm a businessman. He said, fine, you're a businessman. How many times have you learned the relevant laws of dealing in business ethically? And he said, well, I'm kind of busy. I haven't. He says, fine. Have you ever finished a tractate of the Talmud? Have you ever finished a Masechet of Gemara? He says, no, I'm really sorry. And Aaron Leib Steinman says, okay, I have one last question. Have you ever learned a daf of Gemara in your life? And the businessman looks down and with a tear in his eye, he says, no. And Rav Aaron Leib Steinman says, okay, so you can buy your car. Because who would ever be jealous of someone who has never learned a daf of Gemara in their life? Be educated. Be an educated person. You can only be passionate about your Jewish identity if you know what it means to be Jewish. Go to Israel, ask your teachers a million questions, ask your rabbis questions, read as much as you can, question as much as you can, but be educated, because education will lead to inspiration, which will lead to passion.
Wow.
Rabbi Broide, last question and last word.
First of all, Uri Pilichowski was a rabbi at Boca Raton Synagogue. Just going to throw that in there. And number two is, I'm just wondering, anecdotally, have you seen college students saying we're done and we're leaving the secular colleges, maybe going to YU? Are they actually picking up and going?
I haven't seen people at Harvard who are already here who left. But I know for a fact that there are people, because I've had conversations with them, who said, I was accepted to this program at Harvard and I'm not doing it. In fact, every time someone sends me that, because now it's about a dozen, I take a screenshot. And to me, that's actually really, it's unfortunate, but it's powerful that we have young Jews who are saying, I am not risking my Jewish identity, and I'm not battling anti-Semites. If Harvard wants to run itself into the ground and accept a radical minority who are anti-West and anti-American and anti-Semitic, that's their problem. But I want no business in that. And that's actually really admirable.
Shabbos, thank you for your time. We could speak for more hours. You know, it's fascinating conversations. There's so many topics that we didn't even touch on. All I know is, all I know is that we can't wait to see what happens next for you. And when you get out of that cesspool called Harvard, and you're really able to make a difference in this world, what's next? And we'd love to host you in Boca for Shabbos. So definitely be in touch and come down anytime. We'd really love to. And in the meantime, it does take courage. Hashem should continue to give it to you. Continue to fight the good fight. Should be successful. We want sweeping victories in Israel. We want sweeping victories against Harvard. We want sweeping victories for the Jewish people in every direction. May we hear only besoros tovos. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Catch us next time for another peek behind the Bima.